In our current presentation, and part of our video library on fine artists, we look at the spectacular work of Julien Dupré, a painter who mastered the genre of the French countryside and its people, a painter who worked faithfully with consummate skill to render the many aspects of country life. His hardy peasants are presented as heroic in their duties to render a productive life with the help of their animals at each passing season. What do we know about Dupre, his early years and beyond? His natural gifts were evident from the beginning, so how would it lead him to capture the airiness and glowing light of nature? On his luminous and bright canvases, his great skill of lush handling of pigment gives even more excitement for the student of painting. Artists are always eager to uncover in the works of the masters the mystery in their technique and how they manipulated their tools for recording the visual impression. Our story begins. Dupre's father, Jean, worked as a jeweller, creating both fine jewellery and costume jewellery. His older brother, Jean, also became a jeweller, and both his sister Julie and his niece, Jeanne Henriette, married jewellers. Julien was the only child who did not follow this career. Instead, he was apprenticed to a lace-maker in the late 1860s. However, with the advent of the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, the lacemaker's shop closed, and Dupré soon found himself a soldier. After the cessation of hostilities with Prussia, Julien began his formal study of art, and by 1872, when just 22, he enrolled in a sketching class taught by Monsieur Laporte at the École des Arts Décoratifs in preparation for applying to the École des Beaux-Arts. Once he was accepted, he entered the studio of Isidore Pils until Pil's death in 1875. After that 3-year study, he entered the studio of Henri Lehmann to conclude the full curriculum. It was there that he met Georges Lauget, who would become a lifelong friend. Dupré would dedicate his craft to the glories of painting figures in a landscape, often one of the most difficult of disciplines to achieve. France, and in particular the rich terrain of the countryside, with centuries-old buildings and streams, provided the peace and beauty that an artist could escape to and dream up themes to incorporate into a full-fledged picture. Art historian Janet Whitmore points out in her biography of Dupré that it must be mentioned that there was a growing interest in depicting rural life among the emerging naturalist painters. Naturalism is firmly grounded in the realist painting of pre-war France, but artists such as Jules Bastien-Lepage, Léon L'Hermite, Danan Bouveret, and Julien Dupré began to develop a focused interest in the daily life of ordinary rural people. They were all born within 4 years of each other and came to maturity in the shadow of the Franco-Prussian War. The work of Jean-François Millet, of a generation earlier, and Courbet were key influences, as was the Impressionists' fascination with light and open brushwork. What linked these artists was their emphasis on rural workers, whether agricultural labourers, miners, or the small business people of country villages. What differentiated them from their more academic colleagues was their dedication to portraying the reality of country life unapologetically. Dupré began to establish himself with notice at each of the yearly salons. After a promising debut, Dupré focused his attention on establishing his career, submitting 2 paintings that sold to Goupil and Company, and his Gleaners, which was purchased by Knoedler Galleries, thus ensuring that the young artist was already developing a steady market for his work. In addition, the Paris branch of the London-based gallery of Arthur Tooth and Sons began to purchase works from Dupré, thus introducing his work to a British audience. Dupré's salon entry for 1881, Au Pâturage or In the Pasture, stands out as a singular success, further galvanizing his efforts. Early in their careers, Dupré and Georges Lauget decided to set up a studio together at 14 Boulevard Flandrin, not far from their homes. They would share this space for many years. It was here that Dupre began to accept students in 1882, perhaps because he had won a second-class medal at the 1881 Salon, which meant that he no longer needed to submit his work to the juries for the annual exhibition. This freed up time to focus instead on educating the next generation of artists. One of his first pupils was George W. Chambers, whose works are shown here, from St. Louis, Missouri. The American had previously studied with Jean-Léon Gérôme, but it was under Dupre's tutelage that he began to exhibit at the Salon. Over the next few decades, Dupre would continue to teach, both women and men from across Europe and the United States. Whitmore relates on his home life that Dupre and his wife Marie had two young children, Thérèse, born in 1877, and Jacques, who arrived in 1879. Then 5 years later, the family moved to 10 Boulevard Flandrin, just steps away from his studio, where they would have more room, and a third child, Madeleine, was born there in 1885. All of Dupre's children would learn to draw and paint, although only Thérèse would pursue it as an adult. Her works are seen here, while Madeleine would become a pianist and Jacques a physician. Dupre began a shift from the relatively smooth, polished painting approach on his canvases to a more freely painted surface, where the use of a palette knife is evident, with rich pigment in ample amounts flowing onto the surface. It is this ability to capture nature with gusto that appeals to the painterly observer within art-minded circles. Additionally, we find, in the following decade, the artist would develop pictures in a grander format in size and point of view. His salon painting from 1883, titled Le Berger, or The Shepherd, measuring some 55 by 78 inches, exhibits this new direction by portraying rustic workers on this larger scale. He has harkened back to the Jean Millet era of the sober peasant in a melancholy atmosphere. Whitmore goes on to establish that by the mid-1880s, Dupre's career was well established, and he was selling an average of 19 paintings each year between 1886 and 1890. Most of those paintings were handled by Etienne Bassot, who was the son-in-law of the art dealer Adolphe Goupil. Dupre's works would have been sold at Bassot's Contemporary Art Gallery in Montmartre, which was managed by Theo van Gogh from 1878 until his death in 1891. The gallery also handled Impressionist works by Claude Monet and Edgar Degas, and eventually post-Impressionist paintings. The other gallery that handled a significant number of Dupre's paintings was M. Knoedler and Company of Paris and New York. Michel Knoedler originally worked for Goupil and Sille, and in 1852 he was sent to the US to manage their New York branch. 5 years later, he purchased the New York Gallery from Goupil and established the Knoedler Gallery as a primary entry point for French art into the American market. One of Dupre's earliest American sales was his 1886 Salon painting, Le Ballon, or the Hot Air Balloon, which Knoedler handled for a New York City banker, George Cini. Within a year, Cini loaned this large canvas to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, making it the first Dupre painting to enter an American museum. Dupre covered a lot of ground with his work over many years, always devoted to his favorite subjects, and doing well with the popularity of his style and the feeling he conveyed in the portrayal of peasants and their lives. No matter how far adrift art may venture off, the idea of being close to nature is always soothing in a busy world. Seeing works by Dupre and others of his generation, this great period of naturalism, and the closer they penetrated into their craft, will not be lost. The old saying in the studios of Truth to Nature has in it the idea that when the painter seizes upon the sensations that nature brings to the senses and finds that element that rings true, he has accomplished something special. For Dupre, the typical buyer was a wealthy businessman, often from humble circumstances, states Whitmore, who was assembling a small private collection, in part to establish his family's cultural legitimacy as educated and sophisticated people. The American taste for French art during the Gilded Age illustrates the ease with which visual art can cross international boundaries, but also the occasional irony of the divergent interpretations of any given image. The most well-known instance of this phenomena is Millet's painting of the Gleaners from 1857. Reproductions of this work were widely disseminated to schools, churches, and undoubtedly many modest homes across the U.S. It was perennially popular well into the mid-20th century as an image of hard-working, noble, and specifically Christian peasants. In France, this artwork was understood as a statement about the grueling nature of agricultural work and the desperate poverty of those labourers whose lives depended on their ability to gather up the remnants of grain left in the field after the harvest. In the first decade of the new century, Dupre and his wife Marie travelled to locations beyond their familiar territory of Picardy and Normandy. Although the exact purpose of the trip isn't known, they spent the spring and summer of 1903 in England. Marie, who was also a painter, painted several canvases of an English country house, suggesting perhaps that they were visiting friends there. In 1908, Dupre purchased a plot of land in the mountain town of Mont d'Or in central France, where thermal springs had attracted visitors since ancient Roman times. At home in Paris, Dupre took an increasingly active role in professional art organizations, serving on the jury for the Société des Artistes Français in 1890, and exhibiting faithfully at the Salon every year. On January 23, 1892, he received the French state's highest honour for an artist becoming a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. In 1900, at 49, he became a member of the Central Committee at the Salon, a post he would hold until his death, and he served on the Jury d'admission et de récompense, or the Admissions and Awards jury, from 1900 to 1910. The year 1900 also saw the city of Paris again hosting a grand world fair, celebrating the turn of the century, but also a new direction in the arts. And so we come to the end of this presentation on the works and personal life of Julien Dupré. He was a fastidious worker, and it was a joy to uncover so many of his works, and more yet to discover. We hope you enjoyed this look at a great talent. In closing, please remember to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and there is a PayPal link for any amount to help the channel. So with that, thank you. Until next time, it's bye for now.